I don't know a woman of color leader that I can point to who has been effective in the work and who's been in the game for any length of time who hasn't had someone try to take her out. And the single best piece of advice that I heard in the interviews from the sisters who I think are navigating the treachery of the current moment more successfully than anyone else was this. They said, I don't let anyone near my leadership team. I don't care how skilled they are technically at the job. If they don't have the internal backbone to do the difficult thing that is right instead of the easy thing that is popular. So it is so critical to surround ourselves with people who are not yes people, because we need people to challenge us and question us and be, grapple with us and be in principled struggle with us, because we're not always right as leaders. But people who are not going to curry favor with wherever the winds are blowing in the swarm that may be happening out in the external world or even on the staff, but are going to be steady and to understand what is the right thing to do, both out of empathy for leadership, but also, first and foremost, out of accountability to the communities that we say we are serving. Because that is really the core center of gravity. And I remember when I first came into the labor movement, even coming from a family where I have aunties who are home care workers and who I have uncles who have worked in factories, and I went into labor representing home care, and I sat across the table from a home care worker and across her kitchen table. And, but I was like also out of undergrad. So it's like you come and your mind is awash with all kinds of theories. And, she could give a shit about my theory. She's like, my question to you is, this month I'm deciding between whether I have enough money to get medicine for my father, who I'm taking care of, or to put food on the table for my son. So how's the union going to help me with that? So if we don't, and that was a lesson that I never forgot in terms of, at the end of the day, we have to be accountable to delivering material change for our people and for our communities. And so how are we holding that accountability in the way that we're moving as leaders in protecting ourselves and as people around leaders are moving in flanking and supporting some of our best?
The National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy reports that in 2022, funding for Black communities totaled only 1.3% of overall philanthropic giving. In 2022, funding for Black communities totaled only 1.3% of overall philanthropic giving. Pause for collective eye roll. Thank you.
Or rage.
And we know that Black women-led organizations get even less support than that 1.3%. In your view, what does it look like for funders and collaborators to trust and recognize the power of Black and brown women's leadership? And how can more resources be directed to BIPOC-led nonprofits in a way that is truly transformative and meets this moment?
Yes. I love this question. First of all, I want to lift up an analogy for a minute, because they say that the most dangerous time for the survivor of domestic violence is the immediate time period after they flee the abuser's house. In the last 10 or 15 years, we have witnessed one of the largest breaks for freedom of oppressed groups in this society. From the house of the abuser, the United States that manifests as an abuser. So we see the largest protest movements in the history of the country in the uprisings following the murder of George Floyd, led in large part by Black women. We see the Women's March, at that time the largest protest on women's soil. Let's talk about the culture shift, the sea change in culture that we've seen in LGBT rights in this country. Largest break for freedom. We can anticipate the danger of this moment. So when we see the backlash of fascism that we're in now as one of the worst backlashes we've seen, it should not surprise us. It should make sense to us in the same way that Jim Crow was a backlash to emancipation, in the same way that COINTELPRO and mass incarceration were a backlash to the civil rights and the Black power, Black liberation movements. What we need to understand in this moment, as in those moments of backlash, is that the answer is never to run back into the abuser's house. And this is a lesson that philanthropy struggles with, because philanthropy, like a certain class of predominantly white liberals in each of those other areas, thinks that the response to that backlash and that attack is to make compromises on the backs of the people who are most oppressed. Now, not only do we not need to make compromises on the backs of many groups who are oppressed, but we need to be honest about who let us out of the house in the first place. Because there is no group that was more diligent in leading us out of the oppressor's house and out of the abuser's house than Black women, who voted 94% against Trump, who at the leadership and the founders of the reproductive justice movement, of Me Too, at the leadership of the movement for Black lives. So what do we do in those moments, and what should philanthropy be doing in acknowledging that the people who let us out of the abuser's house are also going to have the biggest targets on their back? So when we see that 300,000 Black women have exited the labor force recently, when we see the funding cuts that are happening to Black women-led organizations, the role of philanthropy is to step in and say, every organization that is effective, that is led by a Black woman, needs to be at the top of the list to examine and say, and call up those leaders and say, what do you need? Because I know that your funding is probably getting cut first, particularly in this anti-DEI environment from other funders. How can I fill that gap? What do you need, sister, in terms of personal and organizational security? Because we know people are coming for you. So how do we get around Black women leaders in this moment and flank and support them like we acknowledge the fact that they risked more than anyone else to get us out of the abuser's house?